Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Anna Sackman. I'm the Data Services Librarian here at UC Berkeley. And joining me today are my colleagues Elliot Smith and Tim Vollmer. Elliot is the Biology and Bioinformatics Librarian in the Library Sciences Division, and Tim Vollmer is the Scholarly Communication and Copyright Librarian. We have been tracking some of the changes to federal public access policies that either have gone into effect or will be going into effect. And we know that UC authors might have questions on what it means, what these new policies mean, what you need to do to comply, and how it intersects with some of the open access publishing support provided by the University of California. So we are going to cover all of this today. We will be putting relevant links in the chat as we review the various policies. Please feel free to ask your questions in chat as we go along, or we will have time at the end when we're opening it up for questions. And as you know, we are recording this session today, and we will be sure to share the video and the slides with you. So just a bit of a rewind here to know where we're coming from. Back in August of 2022, the Office of Science and Technology Policy announced an update to their public access policy. They released a memo that basically says that peer-reviewed manuscripts and any data, code, or supporting material that arise from federal funding must be deposited into an agency-designated repository immediately upon acceptance in a scholarly journal and made freely available upon publication with no embargo. Previous federal policies permitted an embargo of up to 12 months before the author accepted manuscripts needed to be publicly available. And all of the updated agency policies are supposed to go into effect by January 1st, 2026. But at this point, we know what all of the policies will be. And some of them have already enacted these. Probably the most prominent one that's now in effect is the National Institutes of Health public access policy, which actually went live about 6 months earlier than we expected it to on July 1st, 2025. NIH is by far the biggest source of federal research funds, about $48 billion in 2025. We will be reviewing the NIH public access policy requirements, along with 5 other federal funders that are frequently seen here at UC Berkeley. And you will see quite a few similarities between the funders, but each agency is going to be implementing their public access plans in slightly different fashions or with varying requirements. So it's important that the grantees understand what they need to do to comply, and will also help you understand what is required. So today we are going to be covering the public access policies for DOE, NASA, CDC, NIH, NSF, and the EPA. And for each funder, we are going to cover some key definitions, article deposit requirements, data deposit requirements, other requirements like software and code, and we'll include a list of key links to plans and resources. So there will be some similarities between the agencies, as I just mentioned, particularly with definitions of key terms. So it's important that you pay close attention to the language for your funder. There might be some small differences that will impact your workflow. So let's dive in. I'm going to kick us off with the Department of Energy. They define scholarly publications as the final peer-reviewed accepted manuscript or open access article. And they define scientific data as the recorded factual material that is commonly accepted of sufficient quality to validate and replicate research findings. So this does not include things like lab notebooks, a preliminary analysis, case report forms, drafts of papers, things like that. And I do want to note here that classified or controlled unclassified information, which might include some personally identifiable information, will not be made publicly available. And if you have questions about what that means, we're happy to work through that with you. All right, the publication deposit requirements applies to all peer-reviewed research articles final manuscripts, peer-reviewed book chapters, editorials, and conference proceedings. And part of this is that you must include a statement acknowledging DOE as the funding agency, along with the award number or the contract number in the publication. And this needs to be submitted no longer than or no later than the publication date of the article. If the article that you're publishing is published open access, you can submit the accepted manuscript or just provide a link to the article and the metadata to DOE's public access gateway for energy and science, or as it's known as PAGES. Once an article is in PAGES, the metadata, the abstracts, and the full text are downloadable. And perhaps the biggest change, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, is that publications can no longer be embargoed. They do encourage authors to publish green open access, which means self-archiving in a public repository, and they do not prohibit including reasonable open access fees as an allowable cost. They will monitor publisher costs and fees and determine if initial guidance is needed on the quote reasonable publication costs front. You may see here the OSTI eLink and PAGES. OSTI eLink is basically the submission portal for all scientific and technical information, including things like reports and white papers, and PAGES is the repository where the publications are ultimately made available. The data sharing requirements, they aim for researchers to make their data publicly available in order to increase the pace of discovery and promote efficient and effective use of government funding and protect the integrity of the research. A data management and sharing plan will need to be written by the grant applicant or the recipient, and this should include information about the data that will be publicly shared, including where it's going to be shared, how it will be managed over the course of the project, who has access to it, and some of the various metadata standards that might be used. The full guidance for the DOE data management and sharing plan is in what's called the DMP tool, which we'll provide a link to. They do expect researchers to update this plan according to any reviewer feedback they get, and to update the plan in order to reflect progress that has been made or any changes that have been made to the research. This policy applies to any unclassified, unrestricted scientific data from research and development activities. They don't endorse or require that you deposit data in a specific repository. Instead, they'd just like you to select the repository that's most appropriate for your data type and your discipline. Your subject librarian, who we can connect you with, can advise you on the most appropriate repository for your data. And finally, there are a few other small policy requirements that you need to pay close attention to, including all supporting code and software need to be shared in the DOE code repository. This is an internal instance they host of GitLab. And another big change is that all authors are required to have an open researcher and contributor ID. It's known as an ORCID. This is because they're really prioritizing access to machine readable formats for all publications in order to support data initiatives, including use of materials in AI training. So this includes post-submission conversion from other formats and ingesting machine readable formats that are submitted by DOE funded authors. Now, the next slide has a couple of key resources and links that Elliot has been putting into the chat as we've been going along, but it's there for you to revisit at a later time. I am going to move along to NASA. The NASA definition of research data is pretty similar to DOE in that it's the recorded factual material. But here it does not include things like trade secrets, any commercial information that might be developed, or materials that need to be confidential until publication or protected under law. They go into much more detail about this in their policy plan. They also do not want you including any personal or medical information that would create an invasion of personal privacy. It doesn't include any preliminary data, lab notebooks, things like communications with colleagues, which is very similar to the DOE definition. And peer-reviewed scientific research publications are the exact copy of the peer-reviewed publisher-accepted manuscript. This is the one plan where they listed data first in their public access policy. All research with NASA accompanied by a data management plan to describe how the data will be shared and preserved must be included in the grant application. And the data must be made freely available at the time of publication for the peer-reviewed manuscript. The manuscript will need to include information about how to access the data and the accompanying code or software. NASA has quite a few data repositories. Take a look to see if your data is a good fit for their collections, or similar to DOE, you can work with the library to identify another data repository. This might include Dryad or UC Berkeley Library's Dataverse, both of which fulfill their requirements. The biggest piece is that data must have a digital object identifier and be publicly discoverable. Any articles that are submitted to journals that are part of a group called CORUS, which is the Clearinghouse for Open Research of the United States, will be automatically made accessible through their PubSpace collection. And if the publisher is not part of this group, the researcher will need to be aware of any embargo policies that the publisher might have in place. And this is the responsibility of the lead author or the NASA-funded co-author, if it is not the lead author. If the article appears in a journal that is not part of CORUS, then the exact copy of the accepted manuscript needs to be submitted to their PubSpace collection. Again, NASA previously worked within this 12-month embargo period, but publications should now be made available without any delay. They do have a very specific section on software release requirements. So here, any software needs to be published, just like data or journal articles. That includes scripts for managing or analyzing data, any packages for simulations that you may have used, or any libraries that you use for data analysis. And it follows the same timeline. It needs to be made available at the time of article publication. And you will actually need to include a software management plan with your proposal. You can deposit with NASA in NTRS or in a great code repository called Zenodo, which I'm happy to answer questions about. And Zenodo will actually give the software or the code a digital object identifier. A couple of other requirements. Any metadata should be machine readable and submitted in parallel to paper and the data and the code. And they do mention that author publishing charges and data sharing costs related to curation or storage can be included in that budget proposal. And at this point, I am going to pass it over to my colleague, Elliot.
Thank you, Anna. I'll be discussing the public access and data sharing policies of the Centers for Disease Control and the National Institutes of Health. The CDC public access policy creates a publication deposit requirement for the peer-reviewed accepted manuscript, which is the final version of an article accepted for publication in a journal after all changes resulting from peer review. CDC also has a data sharing policy and defines public health data as the factual material commonly accepted as the basis for public health findings, conclusions, and implementation. It states that data could be quantitative, qualitative, imaging, or genomic, but as Anna mentioned, in an earlier context, this does not include things like lab notebooks, physical samples, emails with colleagues, grant reports, and the like. The peer-reviewed accepted manuscript must be submitted to the National Institutes of Health Manuscript Submission System, or NIHMS, upon acceptance for publication, if there is a CDC author or if CDC funded the work described. The accepted manuscript will be made available in the PubMed Central and CDC's STAC repositories with no embargo after publication. As part of the submission of the accepted manuscript to NIHMS, authors must proofread the manuscript to ensure that no errors or changes affecting meaning were introduced before final approval. CDC requires that funding recipients submit and comply with a data management plan, or DMP, for all public health data generated or collected as part of an award. Data underlying a publication should be made available at the latest at the time of publication. The final version of shared dataset should be made available within 30 months of the end of the data collection cycle. The exception is surveillance data, which should be made available within a year. If data cannot be shared, a justification should be included in the final DMP. And Anna earlier mentioned the DMP tool. That's a great tool with lots of templates for the different funding agencies. The final version of de-identified datasets should be deposited in a sustainable repository along with documentation relevant to their use, such as a data dictionary or codes. Data that cannot be de-identified can be made available by request under a use agreement. The location of the data should be included in the updated DMP. Allowable costs for sharing, archiving, and long-term preservation of data may be included in grant budget submissions. And this slide has links to the CDC's public access plans, help resources for NIHMS, and the additional requirements for data management and access. They'll also be added to the chat, as it looks like Anna has already done. For NIH, the NIH Public Access Policy refers to the author-accepted manuscript, or AAM, which is the author's final version incorporating all revisions as a result of peer review, and which includes all tables, figures, and supplemental material. The final published article is the journal's final edited and formatted copy as soon as it is made available, even before being assigned a volume, issue, or other metadata. The official date of publication is when the final published article is first made available, whether in print or electronically. Scientific data are defined as the factual material sufficient to validate and replicate research findings, whether or not they support a publication. Under the NIH Public Access Policy, the author-accepted manuscript must be submitted to PubMed Central, or PMC, using the NIH Manuscript Submission System, or NIHMS, upon acceptance for publication by a journal. The author-accepted manuscript will be made freely available in PMC with no embargo on the official date of publication. The NIH Public Access Policy also requires that an acknowledgement of federal funding should appear in the author-accepted manuscript and the final published article. Suggested language is supplied in NIH Grants Policy Statement 8.2.1. Recipients of NIH funding grant the government the right to make the author-accepted manuscript available in PMC on the official date of publication with no embargo. This is stated in the Notice of Award and also in the NIHMS Submission Agreement. NIH highly encourages authors to include a statement in submitted manuscripts that the article is subject to the public access policy and provides suggested language in its supplemental guidance on the government use license and rights. Allowable costs include reasonable publication costs and can be included in budget submissions. NIH is currently considering whether it should cap the amount that can be requested. Unallowable costs are outlined in the supplemental guidance on publication costs and include compliance fees charged by publishers for zero embargo submission to PMC, or differential fees that are applied by publishers because an article is subject to the public access policy. NIH states that compliance with the public access policy does not require the payment of open access or compliance fees. NIH also has a data management and sharing policy, which requires that all grant applications include a data management and sharing plan, outlining how scientific data resulting from awards will be preserved and shared, unless restrictions apply. Data associated with a scientific publication should be shared no later than the official date of publication or the end of the award, whichever comes first. Data not associated with a publication that is generated or collected under an award should be shared by the end of the award. Data should be kept available as long as it is useful to the research community or the public. NIH offers supplemental information on selecting an appropriate repository for data and notes that allowable costs for sharing and preservation must be incurred before the end of the award. So if the data are to be preserved for 10 years, the repository fees for all 10 years must be paid during the award period. And this slide has links to the NIH Public Access Plan, help resources for NIH MS, and the NIH Data Management and Sharing Policy. They'll also be added to the chat. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tim Vollmer.
Thanks so much, Elliot. So I'm going to cover National Science Foundation, and NSF has been talking about their public access plan for several years. So they released a public access plan 2.0 back in February 2023 that lays out some of the changes they expected to make to comply with the OSTP's public access policy, which ensures open, immediate, and equitable access to NSF-funded research. Now, that being said, it appears that the NSF's current guidance has not yet fully incorporated these updates. So the current Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, that's a mouthful, shortened to PAPPG, it was publicly posted on the NSF website, and the current version is 24-1. So this document, as well as other NSF links such as their FAQ on public access, actually still refer to an optional deposit embargo of up to 12 months. However, we do see that a draft of the updated PAPPG, version 26-1, it does include the changes to comply with the zero embargo public access policy, although we do not believe this is current at this time. But for the sake of the workshop today and what will be required of NSF grantees, we're going to use this draft version to explain what you'll need to do to comply. So let's assume that NSF will be in compliance with the 2022 OSTP memorandum, just like every other federal agency making extramural research grants. And let's assume that the pieces that they previewed in the draft PAPPG, those are going to be implemented now or at least soon. So what are some of the key definitions related to public access considerations for articles and also data? Well, they have author-accepted manuscript. These are final versions of manuscripts accepted for publication after peer review in either scholarly journals or juried conference proceedings. And their definition for data sets are a collection of scientific data used as evidence in deposited author-accepted manuscripts, together with documentation regarding the structure of the data. So when we're talking about article deposit requirements, NSF's draft PAPPG says that author-accepted manuscripts must be deposited as part of the annual project reporting process. Now, we believe that this means that when you submit your yearly project updates as laid out in your NSF grant agreement, at that point in time, you're required to also upload any relevant author-accepted manuscripts. Now, we note that this seems to be somewhat deviate from the spirit of the OSTP memorandum, which says that versions of articles arising from federal grant funding should be made available at the same time as it's published in a scholarly journal. Now, you can imagine that if grantees are only required to deposit annually, for some articles, there could be a significant gap between when the article is published in a journal and when the grantees are required to deposit their author-accepted manuscripts on an annual schedule. The other requirement is that grantees should deposit those author-accepted manuscripts in NSF's platform, which is designated the Public Access Repository, or PAR. So let's talk a bit about what the draft PAPPG says about data-related aspects of the policy. So scientific data sets underlying peer-reviewed scholarly publications resulting from federally funded research should be made freely available and publicly accessible by default at the time of publication. They should be deposited in a repository which assigns a persistent identifier. So, for example, a digital object identifier, or DOI. And the persistent identifier must be recorded in NSF's public access repository as a part of this annual project reporting process. A few other related requirements and considerations for NSF's public access policy. One is around persistent identifiers. So author-accepted manuscripts and data sets must be reported in annual project reports with a persistent identifier. Again, those DOIs. And NSF also clarifies that they are leveraging the federal purpose license. This is the government use license that Elliot mentioned, and it means that for author-accepted manuscripts created through grant awards, NSF reserves a royalty-free, non-exclusive, and irrevocable right to reproduce, publish, or otherwise use the work for federal purposes. And this is the legal mechanism which provides for public access. And here we have the several links related to the NSF plans, which are going to be dropped in the chat right about now. So let's move on to the Environmental Protection Agency, of course known as the EPA. Now, according to EPA's order on this matter, the objective of their policy is to maximize, at no charge, immediate access by the public to peer-reviewed scientific research journal publications or associated author manuscripts, as well as the underlying digital research data that's created in whole or in part with the agency funds. EPA defines the author manuscript, which is the version of a scientific research journal publication that has been peer-reviewed and accepted for publication by the journal, including all changes made by the author during the peer review process, but not the formatted, copyrighted version created by the publisher. And the definition of scientific research data are the digital recorded factual materials commonly accepted in the scientific community as necessary to validate research findings. So let's explore what's required with article deposit. So the EPA grant recipient is responsible for making the author manuscript, which is associated with the journal publication. They're responsible for making it accessible to the public at no charge, and they use the PubMed Central repository. Now, regarding timing, the recipient must submit the author manuscript to PMC within 30 days of journal publication. And this includes the full text document and any associated supplementary materials posted or published by the peer-reviewed journal. Okay, so what about data requirements? Well, scientific research data underlying a journal publication are to be posted to a publicly accessible data repository by the recipient within 30 days of the date of the journal publication. And researchers should use a digital, online, public access repository for preserving, maintaining, and providing access to federally supported research data. Now, the grantee may use the repository of their choice, provided the repository ensures that research data are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, while also addressing privacy, security, and other necessary protections. And data must be accessible in at least one machine-readable format. So for EPA, here are some a few other requirements and considerations. So individuals conducting research under the award must obtain and use a digital persistent identifier for themselves, such as the ORCID ID that Anna mentioned. So ORCIDs are sort of like a social security number for researchers, and they're free to obtain online. And it's a good practice to get one if you don't already have it, so that your research can be unambiguously connected to you. And oftentimes you'll see journals or funders ask that you provide your ORCID ID in a publication workflow or in a grant application. Like some of the other agencies, researchers can build in reasonable, necessary, and allowable costs for data management and public access into their grants. And these costs need to be included in research applications in order to be considered allowable. And finally, grantees receiving funds through EPA may not sign agreements with publishers that restrict EPA's usage rights in a manner that is inconsistent with the federal purpose license. Remember, this is the legal mechanism that ensures federal agencies can post those grant-funded research outputs for broad public access. And here we'll provide a few links to the public access plan for the EPA. So we've talked about the 6 agencies we wanted to cover today, and how they're adapting to the OSTP memorandum that requires this free, immediate, and equitable access to federally funded research. And we reviewed how most of these agreements are requiring that grantees share their author-accepted manuscripts as well as associated data sets in repositories for immediate and free access by the public. And when you do so, you're not required to pay additional fees for this. At the same time, we know that some publishers are offering the opportunity to publish articles open access directly on their publisher websites. This is for fully open access journals, in which journals typically require the payment of an article processing charge from the author in order to publish there. And this term, article processing charge, is sometimes shortened to APC. There's also hybrid open access journals, and these are traditional subscription journals which offer an open access publishing option should the author agree to pay an APC to make their individual article immediately open access on the journal's website. So why are we bringing this up? Well, for the last several years, the University of California has been supporting open access publishing in many journals, both fully open access journals and also those hybrid open access. We've been supporting it through a variety of system-wide open access agreements. And these agreements provide both reading access to all the journal's content for UC faculty, researchers, and students, and it also defrays some or all of the article processing charges for UC corresponding authors. Now, if you're interested in these agreements and the financial support offered by the UC for open access publishing, we're going to share a few links in the chat. We have a webpage that covers and lists all of the open access publishing agreements and discounts. It's basically a long list of all the current UC OA publishing agreements, and each has its own page with all the information about that agreement. There's also a helpful journal open access lookup tool, shortened to JOLT. And a JOLT is a helpful tool where you can input the name of a particular journal, and it'll return whether there's a UC open access publishing agreement. It'll also tell you some of the high-level details and link to the page where you can find more information. Another thing we want to bring up are the reactions from some academic publishers to the zero embargo federal public access policies. And we've seen that some publishers are giving conflicting information that we believe might be confusing to authors. So as we've discussed, under the public access policies, the federal government is leveraging that federal purpose license And again, this is the legal text that's in the Code of Federal Regulations that they're using to ensure that grant-covered authors can share their author-accepted manuscripts as well as the associated data sets at the same time as they're being published in a scholarly journal. Now, publishers should not be able to override these pre-existing federal purpose licenses, although this is what some of them seem to be attempting to do. So we've seen that some publishers are telling federal grant-funded authors who are publishing in hybrid journals that they either need to pay an article processing charge where otherwise they would have been able to publish via the traditional subscription route without a fee, or authors are being told that they can't make their author-accepted manuscript available in a federal repository at the same time as publication. So essentially, they're being told they need to stick with a previous 6-month or 12-month embargo. And this is how some major publishers such as Elsevier, Springer Nature, American Chemical Society, Wiley, Taylor and Francis, and Oxford University Press are approaching this. Now, luckily, the University of California's open access agreements with some of these publishers can help address some of those challenges. So here are just a few examples. So for example, if you're publishing in any Elsevier journal, fully open access or hybrid open access, you can choose to publish open access right in the journal, and the UC will cover some or all of the associated article processing charges. If you're publishing in a Springer Nature journal, the situation is similar. However, if you're publishing in a Nature portfolio journal, so for example, Nature Chemistry, the University of California is only able to cover up to $1,000 of the article processing charge, and you'd be responsible for using your grant or research funds to cover the remainder. And the final example is from the American Chemical Society. The UC used to have a system-wide open access agreement with ACS, but unfortunately, UC no longer provides any coverage to pay for article processing charges leveraged by ACS. So if you want to publish open access in ACS journals, you'll be responsible for paying the whole article processing charge, or their alternative fee that they call an article development charge. Now, APCs, as we've talked about, are typically allowable costs under federal grant guidelines. So if you encounter any of these problems, we encourage you to reach out to us and we can walk you through some potential ways to navigate it. So as we wrap up the presentation piece of today, we just want to provide a few takeaways from the information that we shared. So as you've heard, the agency public access plans vary somewhat, and they may have different requirements to ensure compliance. But overall, first, if you receive grant funds from federal agencies and you're producing research outputs, you should look at the requirements of your agency to determine how you need to share those outputs. And typically, you'll be required to submit your author-accepted manuscript to a repository so anyone can access it for free at the same time that it's formally published in an academic journal. And you'll also be required to share your data under the same zero embargo timeframe. You should read the requirements from your agency for any other things that you need to do to comply. Second, you should be aware that some publishers are putting up other requirements regarding their interpretation of the zero embargo publishing policies, and these can sometimes be confusing to authors. Third, you can leverage the University of California's open access publishing agreements as necessary to cover some article processing charges where they would come up. And you can also consider building in funding for publication fees in your future grants. And finally, you should feel free to reach out for assistance from the library and related units on campus. And we're here to help. Other units are here to help. And Anna is now going to go over that with a little bit more detail.
Thanks, Tim. So the library provides support in a couple of different ways. We have scholarly communication and information policy, the office that Tim is in, and they support researchers who are navigating copyright, intellectual property, scholarly publishing, including open access and the funding issues, and also tracking scholarly impact. They are really the experts on UC's open access policies. The Library Data Services Program, which I am part of, helps researchers with writing their data management plans through the DMP tool, and also with selecting the best repository for sharing and publishing your data at the end of a project. And we can help you put those data management plans into action, figuring out storage and computation and data transfer. Each department within the library has a library liaison like Elliot who can get you pointed in the right direction. So Elliot is the liaison to the Biological Sciences Division. And we're happy to help you find the liaison for your department. You can also familiarize yourselves with the programs in the library and the various tools that we support. We have a lot of broader campus support as well, depending on what you need. There is research, administration, and compliance, which facilitates and ensures campus compliance with all research regulations. And this includes the Institutional Review Board, or IRB, and the Sponsored Projects Office, which reviews and authorizes proposals for submission. So for more information about the grant submission pipeline at UC Berkeley, there is a URL that you can visit, which I believe Elliot has already put in the chat. And at this point, we are going to wrap up our presentation portion for today. We will stop the recording and open it up for your questions. And it would also be really helpful if you could fill out the workshop survey, either by using your phone on the QR code here or clicking on the link that we will be putting in the chat. Thank you to everyone for being here. And now we'll open it up for questions.